I would love to hear some observations you have seen on how the oil and gas firms are dealing with energy transition and what strategies they are used in respond to energy transition.
Thank you for letting me talk to you about this, because it is a very, very interesting theme and so important theme. Oil and gas is still a dominant energy deliverer to make this world go around. When it comes to all of these renewable resources, just to set the scene on some of the challenges, you have solar power, right, where you're harnessing photovoltaic PV cells, then get it into electricity. And there's wind, and where you get the kinetic energy of wind into electricity. One of the challenges there is that you quickly get into conflict with where you're putting it, and people don't really want it because it takes up a lot of space. For instance, here in Norway, there's a lot of debate because one windmill, it basically takes up a soccer field size of one windmill. And then with all the roads going in, you destroy a lot of nature. It's noisy. The other challenge with wind is that it's only intermittent. When it's no wind, there's no electricity, obviously. And then we need that storage. I mean, the holy grail here is to find a good storage, which is the same for solar power. You store this so that when there are no wind or sun, you can then use it. And then that's for onshore. If you go offshore, so the first step is that you can put it on the seabed when the water is not too deep. I think that's economic to do, but there's not that many areas where it is, like just outside the Netherlands, some side outside of the UK. So the next one that would be really good to get commercialized is floating windmills. But they are more expensive. You have to have the whole floating part. And that's one of the things that's being put a lot of research into and developing. But you need a big scale to get it go down in price. Unfortunately, the last few years, the prices really following the war in Ukraine has gone up instead of down. Hydropower. You also have geothermal power, where you drill in and you harness the heat from the mantle. And then you have both green and blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen is the one, the electrolysis of the water. Blue hydrogen is some subsidized trial projects in Norway where you, for instance, there's one project where you have cement production and you take out the CO2. That's going to be shipped and then injected into a reservoir. So basically, instead of producing oil and gas, you then re-injecting the CO2 into the reservoir. But all of that is also capital intensive. The question will be, do you have a buyer that is willing to pay for that cement, pay the premium for a CO2-free cement? So, but overall, though, some of the challenges, none of them is the one solution. All of these avenues, I think, needs to be pursued, but there's not clearly one answer. And I think you're going to see localized circles where, for instance, in Hammerfest in northern Norway, there's an LNG plant and there's gas production, and they would like to use some of the gas, take out the CO2 and make ammoniac, and that can be supplied in a region there. And you find that in Germany towards Norway, maybe there's a CO2 project where we get the CO2 up here and inject it here, and similar other places in the world that you find these optimized solutions. But still, a lot of them, what they struggle with is intermittency, wind and solar in particular. Infrastructure, there is no infrastructure. The gas pipelines that go from Norway to Europe, they cannot handle the CO2 because the CO2 will make the pipelines brittle. That doesn't work, then they can crack. So either they need to be shipped by boat or there needs to be built a new pipeline system. I think the first one is probably more likely. It requires investment, as we talked about. Then it is public opinion and policy. The public opinion shifts a little bit, and also nobody tends to want something in their backyard. Everybody wants renewable, but they don't want it that if it's a windmill by their cabin or by their house or by, they don't want to see it, but I want it to be there. And then, of course, you need a government to have policies in place at the pace that it can develop fast enough to what we need. And the cost of technology was decreasing, but it's been on the rise, and it's important that innovation and scale makes these go down again, because right now it's too expensive. A question: what does different oil and gas companies, how are they approaches and strategies? I'll say a little bit in general first, and then I'll give some examples. Several of them are now shifting, and they're taking capital from oil and gas and investing into really capital intensive renewable production, like wind, solar, and hydrogen, and CO2 storage. The other thing they do is to reduce the carbon intensity in their existing operation. They do carbon capture, they do trying to look at the efficiency and making sure they're not flaring CO2, but they're capturing it. But one of the challenges is that it's really capital intensive, and it's not really clear if you make any money on it. Although oil and gas prices are volatile, it still has that market investor appeal that they are also very high, like they are now. That kind of money you may not be able to, and upside you probably won't see for solar or wind. What's always been really attractive with oil and gas is this high peaks we've seen, which you're just making a lot of money and a lot of return for shareholders. That's one of the big uncertainties you have in the whole energy transition. But thankfully, a lot of companies are investing, and we come into quite a few countries are subsidizing and making conditions such that companies are willing to spend the money to develop and try to make this work. And there's another one. You have also an existing workforce in company that may not have the right skill set for that transition. And then there's a risk that companies, they do, but there's a risk they invest heavily into technology that never will become a market. If you look at European companies, because EU's been quite clear on expectation, you'll see that companies like Total and Shell and Equinor are really going strong at the energy transition. And so Total is investing heavily in solar and wind power. Also, Shell have clearly net zero emissions by 2050. Similar like Total, they are going really heavily into the energy transition. They also focus on hydrogen and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Equinor diversify the company's energy portfolio by expanding into renewable energy, and they also invest a lot into research, and this is important, and development to drive innovation in oil and gas production to reduce CO2 emissions, but also for develop new technologies to help the transition. So both in existing, but also the renewable transition. But these things are slow, but that's why we need more development in technology. But meanwhile, we still need the gas. And then they also, and I think this goes for all of these companies that I mentioned, they are engaging with stakeholders, including the customers, investors, the policymakers, in order to drive this energy transition and getting towards a lower carbon economy. To sum up, I think all of the European companies are really strong in trying to make the energy transition. I was then going to come now to the US companies. I worked for ConocoPhillips myself, but not in this period, but ExxonMobil has been criticized for being slow in response to the energy transition. They have now in recent years, however, started to take steps towards diversifying its portfolio, particularly on carbon capture and also biofuels. And of course, like everyone else reduce emissions in their existing oil and gas production. And of course, which they are right to do, is that gas is clean alternative to coal. So that's one of the things, but they have been slower. And I think that's maybe the trend I'd say for ConocoPhillips as well. They are looking into technology on their existing production. They are looking at lower carbon energy sources and carbon capture, but they, without having compared the capital invested in new technology and newer energy sources, I think there will be a clear trend that the American companies are lagging the European companies. Overall, I'd say a really, really good move from the oil and gas. And then I like to add one personal comment is, I get a little bit frustrated in Norway as well. It's very easy to attack an oil company, but nobody is willing to say, what am I using? Who creates the demand? Yeah, I do. You do. Everybody, we does. We want our computers or telephones. All of this is often, there's elements of petrol in them. It's use energy to create it. We create the demand, but are we willing to change how we live? I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't have responsibility, but I think it's easy to blame someone else. It's like we all grown up where there's someone bad and there's someone good, and we automatically put ourselves in the good category. I'm not by far trying to take away the responsibility to the big majors, because ExxonMobil, the biggest company in the world for many years, although not anymore, have a massive responsibility to drive the energy transition. But I'm very pleased to see, particularly the European companies, how they're moving it forward. So hopefully we get a Wizard of Watts.
Okay.
That we have a magical tale of energy transformation.